What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of 10X Recruiting, brought to you by MetaView. Sile, it's 2026, man. How was your holiday?
Holiday was sick. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, lots of good thinking time with the kids. It was great. How was yours?
It was good. We were in Arizona. It was 75 degrees, which was bizarre in December. So we went to a water park and then came back to Utah, and there's very little snow. So sadly did not ski as much as I would like to. I do want to talk about our guest today, which is Jon Bischke. Jon and I have known each other for a long time. I was introduced to him as a potential angel investor. He sadly did not invest in my company, which was actually smart for him. But Jon is OG recruiting tech. Entelo was one of the first, sourcing as a service, sourcing as like a tool products that came out. And then he's now at ZoomInfo building out like their recruiting product. What were your takeaways from this episode, Sal?
Biggest one, which just resonated a ton, given what I'm working on, frankly, or the environment I'm working in, was pipeline really does cure everything. So he was talking about how essentially where you sort of get these uncomfortable situations where you're considering hiring someone that you really shouldn't, it's only ever in a scenario where the rest of the pipeline isn't there. And so actually, if you can keep that pipeline strong, then you inherently increase the quality of the hiring decisions you make. It's sort of like in sales, you have this concept of the BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. The concept is whenever you're negotiating with someone, when you're making any type of decision with someone, you need to understand what their best alternative to actually agreeing with you is. And so actually, if you're going into a hiring decision and your alternative is spend the next 6 weeks trying to generate pipeline and with the sort of vain hope there might be someone else out there versus hire this person, that's a shitty position to be in. If your best alternative is, hey, just run the next week of interviews because I've got 10 other people at a similar stage, that's a pretty good position to be.
I have two takeaways. The first one is humans are going to stop doing top of funnel work. So similar to the pipeline solves all problems thing, obviously MetaView is building this product right now, which is straight gangster. But if the world has access to all of the profiles that exist, then why are we all sifting through them for the first time? That is where software and AI should help. And that is obviously the shift that is coming right now. And that's interesting from Jon, who built Entelo, to say that, because I agree. The next piece, which was pretty interesting, is proof of work sourcing is going to be the new advantage, especially for these AI roles. Basically, the takeaway here is LinkedIn is incomplete. And especially for some of these crazy AI researcher types, they might not even be on LinkedIn. And so when they're working on stuff, it's happening off of LinkedIn. So how do you figure out what they're doing? Well, it's typically in the forms of papers and commits, conference talks, those sorts of things. It did make me think of as we enter this new era of engineering hiring, how much are we going to want to see proof of work versus logo, which is primarily how we've been sourcing up to this point?
I definitely think there's something there. I think this transferability of your previous work achievements, this more transferable achievement based, almost like resume. It's been talked about for as long as I've been in the game, which is about 7 or 8 years. So I don't think that's totally new. And yeah, I can see how it applies in engineering, although I would say the way sort of engineering is obviously changing, where much more sort of the actual coding being done by AI as well. I think therefore you're adding a new variable into the mix. So I think it'd be really interesting how that plays out when it sort of comes into contact with reality. One thing that I was just chatting and saying how we did sort of a mini performance review sort of process with some of my team recently. And the way I did that was asked, in this case, ChatGPT to play the role of a Socratic coach for me to elicit the feedback from me and ask questions and then help me structure it. So I could just say what I was thinking and then react to the prompts. What I sort of got thinking about there was, well, imagine a world in future where, let's say I get fired as the CEO of MetaView and someone new comes in and it's the same team. Who owns that data that all of the AI has from me? And would MetaView, the company, whatever company, not want that to be transferred to this new CEO who has these direct reports? And if that's the case, at what point does that direct report say, well, I want to take that with me as well. I want to be able to pass that on to this new company I go to. So I do wonder if it's not even this proof of work, if it's actually the AI's view of the person becomes the main thing that we, determines obviously what you end up doing in future as well, because it's going to have the most information about you and know what work you've done and all those sorts of things, as opposed to these more, tangible things like how many commits have you done? No, maybe, Cursor's going to have an opinion. Hey, this is a shitty engineer. Don't hire this person. We saw them over here. I know it would never transpire that way, but it's just an interesting like food for thought.
It's just going to be new in this era. And that's what I think is interesting. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. Jon is a homie. He's one of the OGs in recruiting tech. So without further ado, here's my episode with Jon. This is 10X Recruiting, a podcast from MetaView. Let's get after it. Jon, what's up, man? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to see you. Good to be on the pod.
For people who don't know you, you're kind of the legend OG recruiting founder. Like Entelo, I mean, we were users at DoorDash. Like everybody was using it back in the day. Just for the audience that doesn't know, because we do have some young listeners who are probably like still in the womb when Entelo was being built. Can you give them the rundown of what Entelo was and that background story?
Well, it was a crazy, crazy time when we got that business started. It was 2010 in Silicon Valley, right? And so you had 2008 and 2009, and the economy was a mess, and no startups could raise money. That was the Sequoia, the infamous RIP Good Times memo era. And I was an EIR at Battery Ventures, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And just talking to a bunch of my friends who are founders, and all these founders would always complain about how hard it is to hire people. And so I just figured, if all of you are struggling with this same problem, we probably have an opportunity here to build a business. And at the time, it was the rise of a little website called GitHub. There were a bunch of these other vertical professional networks coming online, Dribble and Behance and all these other ones. And all those websites had data points on talent, right? So you could if you were a good technical recruiter in 2010, going into GitHub and like identifying a good engineer, I mean, you were so far ahead of the game. And so the idea occurred to myself and my co-founder. It's like, hey, why don't we make a lot of that data more user-friendly? So as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, you could go in and start to leverage all this data that was living in all these different places of the world. You had this like boom of companies that were coming in saying, I think there's a better alternative to LinkedIn and Monster and Career Builder and whatever people were using at the time. And so it was fun. I mean, all of us, we had no idea what we were doing. All of us were from outside the space. And so it was super cool just to be innovating at a time where I think a lot of people were uncertain about what the future of recruiting was going to look like.
Yeah, give people the rundown of the product.
Yeah, I mean, we started with the premise that everybody at that point in time had started to adopt LinkedIn, and we didn't see that changing. I mean, LinkedIn's a great platform, but I think that the challenge is, as you know very well in talent, you've got a fixed pie, right? We're not necessarily creating a lot of new talent at scale. And so you getting an engineer or a product manager or a salesperson ahead of your competition is a win for you and a loss for them. And so if you're using LinkedIn, you're getting the same data. You have the same communication vector as everybody else does. You need something to give you a leg up. And so what we did is we indexed a whole bunch of information about people, about their professional capabilities, about what they were good at. So you think about an engineer, they're committing open source code. People are following them on GitHub. These are all signals about someone's capability. And so we indexed all that information and we wrapped it into, effectively a user-friendly search engine that would allow a recruiter or a hiring manager to go in to be able to find information about these people and really have a different lens on the world than what they were getting via LinkedIn at the time. And then, within the next, I think, year or two, LinkedIn went public. Obviously, the valuation shot up. And so you had a lot of venture investors, because they always struggle with this with their portfolio companies, of the founder complaining at the board meeting how hard it is to hire. They were like, hey, this thing is interesting enough. We're going to put some money into it. And that began the growth journey back in 2011.
And how long did you run that business?
Ran it for 9 years. And I always describe Entelo as 3 acts. It was the first act, first 3 years of in the jungle with a machete trying to get to product market fit. We'd go pitch recruiting teams and they'd be like, what are you? Are you a resume database? No, we're not a resume database. Are you a job board? No, we're not a job board. So we had to explain ourselves and we had to try to forge the market, because one did not exist for top of funnel sourcing products like ours back at that point in time. Then we had 3 years that were the go-go years, where all of a sudden like things were working. And now it's like, oh, this could actually be a really big business. And a little thing happened back in probably 2015 or 2016. LinkedIn got acquired by Microsoft, right? And I don't know if you remember where you were when you got that first text message, hey, LinkedIn just got bought by Microsoft, but it was a shocker for the industry. And I think a lot of venture investors at the time said, hey, we think that could be the beginning of the end for LinkedIn. And I know that sounds silly. A decade later, LinkedIn's way stronger than they've ever been. But remember, Microsoft had messed up a ton of acquisitions prior to the LinkedIn acquisition. So you could easily see Microsoft coming in and meddling and doing something. To their credit, they did not. And so there was a credible case at that point in time that LinkedIn would stumble. and a company like Entelo would be right there ready to catch it. So we raised a bunch of money, hired, got up to about 150 people, tens of millions of revenue, kind of classic Silicon Valley growth story. And it was good until it wasn't. And then the last 2 or 3 years were a much harder situation where we had to contract the team. We had to make some really tough decisions about our future. And I really enjoyed the 9-year journey. And at the end of the 9-year journey, I was ready for a different chapter. I was ready for a new adventure.
So today, I think there's like a lot of Entelo copycats that exists. Like there's a lot, basically it's like a very similar product. Maybe some of it like has AI slapped on top.
Mhm.
Why do you think that's the case? Like this, it feels like this product kind of like the market still wants it.
Yeah, well, I think there's always going to be an appetite for a bright, shiny object in our space. I mean, anytime you go into a recruiting organization, you say, hey, I've got this opportunity for you to find new people and be able to improve your pipelines and your funnels. Everyone's going to lean in at least on that conversation. And we found it very easy on the Entelo side to get new business. And I think a lot of the copycats, as you framed it, I think they do as well, right? So getting these businesses to 5 million, 10 million, 15 million in revenue, I'm not going to say that's easy, but certainly a number of people at this point in time have done it. The really challenging part in the space is, and I've been studying the space for the better part of the last 14 years, is there have really been two winners in the space. There have been applicant tracking system companies, and applicant tracking system companies are the CRMs, right, of recruiting. CRM is the best SaaS business model of all time. So a number of ATS companies have done really well. You know, the iSIMs, the Greenhouses, the older generation, like we can name 6, 7, 8, 9 winners in that space. And then you've had the consumer platforms, right? The ones that appeal to the job seeker. And again, you've had a number of winners, LinkedIn and Indeed being the most obvious. Both those companies are doing 8 billion in revenue today just with their recruiting businesses, and companies like ZipRecruiter and others. And then when you get outside of those two camps, it's really, really difficult to win. And we could probably literally count on one hand the number of sizable wins that don't fit into one of those two buckets. And I think it's two things. It's number one, you've got to have a strong retention rate. That's why ATS companies win. They have typically in the 90s, if not 100 plus on their net retention. Or you've got to have a really cheap cost of distribution, which is basically where LinkedIn and Indeed won. They got all of us to give them a bunch of data without having to spend much money up front. And so that became very valuable. And so if you're not one of those two categories, I just think, frankly, it's hard. Not to say you can't build a big company. I just think the odds are stacked against you.
It is so hard. I also built a recruiting company, and I feel like all of us who have tried this have like had to learn this lesson the hard way. You're like, well, it's going to be different this time.
Yeah.
But we're in a platform shift now, Jon, right? Like AI is here. So like you've seen this movie better than anybody. Like, what do you think is going to be durable in the future? And specifically like for our listeners, like everyone asks me all the time is like, what do I need to be investing in right now so I'm not behind in the next few years?
I like to think about things in both the next 12 to 18 months, kind of the realistic tech that we can build, and then think about things more 5, 7, 10 years out. And I think in the next 12 to 18 months, what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot more automation at the top of the funnel. People have been talking about this for years, so I'm not saying anything novel right now. But I think we're finally at the point where this is going to start to kick in. And so when we think about today, what happens in recruiting at the top of the funnel, it's a lot of humans talking to humans, right? That's basically 98, 99% of what happens top of funnel in recruiting. You're sitting down on LinkedIn or a platform like ZoomInfo and you're reaching out to somebody and they're responding, right? You're doing the work and they're doing the work. And I think what's going to change significantly first is a lot of that work top of funnel is going to be done through technology instead of people. And I think that's actually going to be a good thing. But then eventually what you need to have is you need to have the other thing on the candidate side as well. So where this goes over 5, 7, 10 years is I honestly think it's agents talking to agents. I don't necessarily know that it's humans talking to humans. So if we go from 98%, 99% humans talking to humans today to a world where 5 years from now, it could be 98, 99% agents talking to agents. Because when you go out to the job market and you're trying to find a job, what are you trying to do? You're trying to canvas the universe of possible things that you would actually be interested in doing. And what's a recruiter trying to do? They're trying to canvas the world of possible people that would be the best to do their job. So these are both challenges that at the end of the day, it's a matching situation of how do I get the right job to the right person? And again, today it's all done predominantly with people. I don't think that's going to be the case 5 years from now.
It's funny because Sile and I are doing our 2026 predictions. And like my second one or my third one is 2026. It's going to be the year of AI taking over the inbound process. And not just like the stack ranking of the ATS, but I actually think like there's going to be assessments at the top end of the funnel, as long as you can explain it to candidates. I had not considered the candidate using like an agent talking to an agent sort of a thing. I have to think about that one more. I guess I can see it. I can also see it being a way to test somebody's like AI nativeness. It's like, well, how good is your agent at talking to our agent sort of a thing? That's kind of like super meta.
Totally. Your professional athletes have agents, right? That represent them in the field.
Yeah, people have talked about that forever. Somebody once told me that we'll never see it in tech because when you get to the executive level, business people want to actually do their own deals.
Yeah.
But now the problem is like it's not just executive levels. We're seeing these $100 million offers, from Meta and others. And like these people actually, I think, do need help negotiating their contracts.
Well, you certainly need help at the top of the funnel, right? You need help with all the inbound activity that's going to come in for people that are sought after. They're going to need some help to triage all of that in this world that we're moving into. I actually think the inbound thing is interesting, and I've got a bit of a counter view on that one. I think the biggest challenge right now with leveraging tech on the inbound side is not the tech, but the regulatory environment. When I got into my role at ZoomInfo, I had a few conversations out of the chute with some people running TA at big companies. And the number one thing that came across in those conversations was candidate fraud is the biggest problem that they're facing. And so when I got into the role, I thought, well, okay, we'll solve that. And then you start to dig into the regulatory environment around using AI to solve candidate fraud. And oh boy, like that's a huge, huge can of worms. So I think tech will provide some meaningful lift on inbound, but I think it's going to be very dependent on where do we go with all this AI regulation. That's going to be a really big issue to watch.
Feels like people are like managing to the lowest common denominator, which is like, what is the least risky thing that we can do, especially if you're a big company?
100%. And we've actually had a number of folks, and I don't think this is uncommon, come to us and say, can we put a button in the product that allows us to turn the AI off? And as a startup guy, seriously, 100%. And we're like, yeah, so about that button, right? Because on one hand, obviously we want to work with these customers, but you can sense this level of risk aversion at the biggest companies of leveraging something right now that they don't know we don't know what the future is going to hold for AI regulation. So if these products are built on the premise that there won't be any or it won't matter, that might be fine in terms of selling it to startups, but good luck trying to sell that into the Fortune 500.
Okay, so you're selling stuff like this today, but like when people do have that level of risk aversion, they're also like missing out on all of this potential leverage.
For sure, 100%.
So how do you move forward if you're them and you have, because here's the other thing with legal, if we're being really honest, they have to justify their existence. Like they have to part of you being scared is why they have job security. And also sometimes like you do really get in trouble. But like for the most part, it's like there's a little bit of fear mongering, I think, from most legal teams that I've worked with. How do you get these people comfortable using tech that is providing real leverage for the rest of the world?
I think there will be in this industry a bit of a flight to quality over the next 2 to 3 years, because I do think that the AI landscape is so unpredictable that if you're going to work with somebody, the question is how well has that company been vetted, right? And so from my perspective, I think the increasing scrutiny that these companies are under because of the impact of AI means, well, then if I'm scared, if I'm nervous, that pushes me away from the super early stage company that just started yesterday. And it pushes me towards somebody more big and established. Now, I might be leaving innovation on the table, right? I probably am leaving some innovation on the table, but I'm going to make that choice. So where I think we see, and this was the Entelo journey as well, is that the startups that come into the space sell to startups, right? They sell, the Series A company sells to other Series A companies. It's like the Y Combinator company that just sells to other YC companies. And eventually they work their way up to enterprise. And then the enterprise companies sell to enterprise. And I think the really big question is, does that playbook actually become stronger, more intensified because of AI? The big companies want to flock to the big companies. The startups are fine using the startups. And we'll see how that plays out.
That's really interesting. So essentially what you're saying is like the bigger companies get bigger because they have established moats.
I mean, look at what's happening in a lot of AI generally, right? So I think initially the thought process was, oh, these startups are going to run circles around Google and Microsoft and they're going to eat their lunch. Today, anybody who's saying that Google's not going to be a big time player in the future of AI they don't know what they're talking about.
All right, so let's go back really fast. So you shut down Entelo, you kind of go off into the forest for a couple of years, and then you
Didn't
take
shut down Entelo. Didn't shut down Entelo.
sorry,
I ended
didn't
up
do that.
passing the baton to a new
Pass the
CEO
baton to Entelo.
and stepped back onto the board.
Yeah,
Entelo is still around. We just talked to a customer yesterday who's happily leveraging the Entelo
Sick.
technology.
I love that.
I went off and I did 4 years in healthcare and health tech, but I felt like I needed to clear my head. So I kind of went into the forest, so to speak, just a different type of forest. But I got called back into the space and I got excited because I really felt like there was unfinished business. I felt like we were on to something back in 2017 and 2018 and 2019 that if we had been so fortunate to allow it to continue, I think would have been super interesting. And we didn't get that opportunity back then, but I felt like the timing was actually perfect. And one of the reasons was we were so interested in what was going on with tech and AI back in 2017, 2018, and the market just wasn't ready, right? The LLMs weren't ready, the buyers weren't ready. And now you step back into this world, I feel like it was like Rumpelstiltskin waking up from this 4-year nap. And all of a sudden it was like, whoa, like this is a different industry and people are ready for it now. And the tech is ready to do some amazing things. And so I was very compelled to come back in and build again because I just think that the landscape has changed so dramatically in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it obviously has. So then tell us about your new role, and then what products are you working on today?
Yeah. So I got hired a year ago to run the talent solutions business for ZoomInfo. ZoomInfo was started 18 years ago as predominantly a sales prospecting tool. And at some point in time, the leadership team at ZoomInfo recognized that a huge chunk of the people who were using ZoomInfo for prospecting were recruiters that were using it to find candidates. And so about 5 years ago, they made the decision to launch a product basically with a recruiter-specific lens to help those individuals. It was really a strong seller in 21, 22 because everything was a strong seller in 21, 22. And then it had a couple of tough years. And so they made the decision of, we want to double down on this. We want to bring in somebody from industry to run this business unit. And so I got very attracted to it because ZoomInfo has 35,000 customers today, over 35,000 customers. And when I think about how do you get leverage in this space, there's obviously vendor consolidation, like I mentioned before, a flock to quality. And I felt there was an opportunity to take a lot of that same vision, a lot of that same innovation that we were thinking about it at the Entelo era and bring it now to the medium to large size enterprises that are desperately hungry for this. And so I run that business unit. It's been a blast, like kind of a perfect mix of the startup vibe, but also some big company resources and capabilities that frankly no other startup has.
So you have an interesting perch from where you now sit. What are you seeing with like AI and talent? Like what's going on in the space?
So number one is a lot of people are making investments in data. So back at Entelo, we sold some data to people via APIs, via flat files. It's never a big part of our business, but we knew that there was a market out there. We had one customer paying us over $1 million a year just to access a data feed. And so we felt that there was a big opportunity there. ZoomInfo does 9 figures of revenue every year selling data to sales and marketing organizations. And so when I got into the role, I thought, this is interesting. The reason why there's so much demand right now for data is because everyone's thinking about AI and they're thinking about agentic tech, and they're recognizing that if they don't have their house in order on the data front, all the AI and all the agent stuff they build on top of that, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So they're looking to make investments. They're looking at their CRM, they're looking at their ATS, they're looking at wherever they store data about talent, and they're saying, we want to make an investment. So, that's an area right now that we're playing in. We launched this AI builder catalog the other day, which is really a reflection of talking to a lot of tech companies, recognizing that they're literally by hand building catalogs of AI talent. And we said, well, that's great. And if you've got the resources to do it, fine. A lot of companies do not. And at the same time, we're really good at data, probably the best in the world at assembling data sets. And so can we basically bring to market a product that's the canonical catalog of AI talent? And so we launched that, where we're talking to a number of companies about rolling that out right now. And I think there's going to be an increasing focus on data to augment systems. If there's an underlying theme to the work that I'm doing here at ZoomInfo, it's how do you strengthen the quality of the data that you bring to the table when you're looking to hire? And if we can be the leader in that space, I think that's honestly a fantastic goal for us to have.
It's so interesting you mentioned it. So I was talking to Owen O'Toole, who leads the VC talent practice at Rivi back in August, and we were at dinner together. And this is back when like the first, kind of like whispers of like mega offers were coming out for like these researchers. And Owen was like, there's like 847. It was like one of those like very specific numbers of these people. And I go, how the fuck, how do you know that? And he's like, well, we had to map it
Yep.
because literally like we get pinged all the time.
Mhm.
And we're not going to take a search to where it's like, you know, people think that there's tens of thousands of people who do research work who are like, you know, part of like the OpenAI tree when it doesn't exist. It's so interesting because talent mapping has always kind of been a thing for the exec world. It's like that's typically where you start because you can anchor a customer in data and say like, this is the world of people. And if we don't start with the world of people, then you're going to burn through everybody because you don't know what you're doing. What are the types of companies that are buying this? Is this like research labs? Is this like, you know, people who are hiring AI engineers? Like, how are you guys thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the above. And I think where there was an extra level of interest right now was in proof of work. So what is the information that would lead me to understand that this person has the capabilities that I'm looking for? And so if you think about a job title, if you think about a company, it's going to give you some data, of course, and you can find that on LinkedIn, you can find that on ZoomInfo. But where we really wanted to go deep was things like patent filings, open source contributions. Have you published an academic paper? Have you spoken at a conference, right? These are the things that are not necessarily easy to search for. I mean, clearly AI is helpful. You can leverage a large language model to look for some of this, but we wanted to pull all of that data together, and we just hadn't seen anybody do it. Certainly no commercially available product was doing that in the market. So where we've really found a lot of interest is obviously you've got like the Mag 7 and they're interested, but you've got kind of this next tier down that they don't have the resources that a Google or a Meta or even a Riviera might have to map the talent, but they know that mapping the talent's important. And so they're looking for a data set, a ready-made data set where they can say, hey, let's go to market. Let's try to find some of these individuals. Let's be able to compete with some of the big guns. And honestly, that's a lot of what we're trying to do is enable them to do that.
I mean, it makes so much sense for me because it's like, this is such a burgeoning field, but it's the proof of work concept is really interesting. And I think deeply applies to anyone who's working in AI. Because if we're being honest about like what we do in sourcing on LinkedIn, we're basically just using shorthand of like, oh, like Nolan led recruiting at DoorDash. So like Nolan has probably led, you know, he's probably managed a team. He's probably presented, like you just make all these like jumps and these mental leaps.
Yep.
But when you're trying to like go after these like research engineers specifically, like you can't afford to make those mental leaps because like, especially for how much we're paying these people.
Totally. Well, and there's also the adage that a lot of these people, they don't need to have super well built out LinkedIn profiles, right? I mean, these are the most in-demand.
Typically they don't.
Typically they don't. I mean, sometimes they're just deleting their LinkedIn profile altogether. So I think that one of the things that this leans into is a world where you have to assume that this is going to continue to intensify. Either this AI thing is a complete bubble and we're wasting our time, or it's going to continue to intensify this war for talent. If there are 850 people, like we have a much larger universe, but then again, there's a lot of people that are tangential to those 1,000 people out there that are interesting. So if you assume that this intensifies, you could see a scenario where a lot of people that they know that they don't have to have a well built out public profile on a place like LinkedIn, all of a sudden that LinkedIn profile gets less detailed or it goes away. And if that's the case, like you need to have a data set like this to be able to find those individuals. So, you know, we're not maybe there today, although I do think there's a trend line that suggests we might move in that direction over the next few years.
All right. So I want to spend the last few minutes, like just given that you ran a recruiting company for 9 years and now you're back in the game and like, you know, you're probably one of the smartest people. You've seen really good recruiting tactics. I think you've seen really bad recruiting tactics too. Actually, where I want to start is right here. So I have a thesis that the top of the funnel stuff, with being able to find people like your products like yours, products like MetaViews, I think that's going to be at some point in time, like everyone's going to have access to these tools. Then the next piece though is like, it's one thing to be able to find the person. It's another thing to be able to get them on the phone.
Yep.
And I think this is where a lot of recruiters break because it's like, oh, great. Like we're just going to apply AI to our outreach. And like, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like when I use ChatGPT, when I use Claude, I'm not getting a message that I'm like, oh my God, that's like super compelling if I'm on the other side of the table. How do you think about like that next problem and what do recruiters do really well and not so well in actually like getting somebody on the phone, which I think is one of the hardest things to do in the game?
Yeah, well, I start from the premise that I think almost all recruiting mistakes fundamentally trace back to pipeline challenges, specifically not enough pipeline top of funnel, right? If you knew that the top 20 candidates in the world were available for you to talk to for any job you were trying to fill, like you'd be a lot pickier, right? Come in with a lot more, gravitas on your calls because you knew that you've got a bunch of people to choose from. I think when people get desperate because they see that their pipeline is sparse, they tend to make bad decisions. They tend to push that higher that they know they shouldn't make. They tend to get a little too, they lower the bar too much. So I start from the premise of like everybody wants a more full pipeline of qualified, of high quality people at the top of the funnel. And I think AI is going to be very good at that, both number one, in terms of identification, right? So you're missing people today. When you go and you run your search, there's people you're missing. We all are today. I think the number of people that we miss, that starts to decrease through technology over time. Then we get to the point of saying, okay, we've got the talent identified. Now, how do we connect with those individuals? And some of the best companies that we worked with were extremely sophisticated with this. They would have algorithms that would be running that would say, hey, we're trying to reach out to this engineer. And one of the people on our engineering team, this engineer is following them on GitHub or whatever it might be. And so we're going to have that engineer reach out to this person, right? So you can do that when you get scaled up. Harder to do that, obviously, if you're in a startup. But this is, again, where AI can be a bit of an equalizer. I think you're going to see tech that's going to start to say, not only is this person a good fit for the role, but here's the right person from your company that should reach out to them because they're more likely to respond to this person than they are the recruiter or the sourcer. So I think that's going to get really interesting. And then I honestly think part of this is how do you free up people from the stuff that honestly people won't do in 3, 4, 5 years, and you get them focusing on the things that I think are uniquely human. So I think when it comes to candidates, we all know there's like A, B, C in terms of propensity to take the job, in terms of ability to perform in the role. Maybe B and C is handled by automation. Maybe B and C is the AI going out there and identifying people. And if you get to the B, who's actually the A, that's great. But then the human recruiter, hiring manager, whoever, they're really spending time on the A candidates. They're really diving deep there. And there may only be 5 or 10 of them, but you're going after them with a level of vigor that you can't today because you've got to go so wide in the funnel to hit your numbers. And so I do think that there is a shifting of where we spend our time that AI is going to bring to the table. I'm not sure if everyone's fully aware of what that's going to look like yet.
That's a really interesting take. And I tend to agree, but just knowing, recruiters and hiring managers oscillating from kind of volume to, more bespoke, I think it's going to be really hard for people because that's actually where the art in the game is. And so talk about that for a second. When you think about, say we do live in a world of bespoke recruiting, and now you have the time to go do that. What does good bespoke recruiting look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think I look at it from my own lens as a person who does a fair amount of hiring. I've probably hired 500, 600 people in my career. I think that part of the challenge, right, is you have to get really, really deep inside the mindset of why does this role make sense for this person, right? And, a classic story of, every startup founder and, I want the big name and all that kind of stuff. And, yeah, sure, you do. But why does that person want to come work for you? And as you know very well, Nolan, it's not a comp thing, right? It's not a hot startup thing, right? There's got to be something compelling in it. And so one of the favorite things that I would always ask people when I would interview them is, what do you want to do next? Right. So you're coming to this job at Entelo or ZoomInfo, and you might be here for 2 years or 5 years or whatever. What do you want to do next? Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get into the head of the candidate to try to identify, does this make sense for them? Because if they can articulate, I want to do X, Y, Z next, and this seems like the perfect logical stepping stone to that, this is potentially going to be a great fit. And then it has the double impact of if they actually come into the role, I can start to look for opportunities for them to start to prepare for that, right? Because very few people will work for us forever. So one of the things I really prided myself on at Entelo is I wanted to get very much into the psychology of what was best for the candidate. And some people do that, but not everybody, for sure, in the recruiting process. And I think by doing that, you're going to close at a higher rate. And look, I had no regrettable attrition across my exec team for 8 years, and I'm proud of that because I felt like there was a partnership that we were having of you're doing good work for Entelo, you're driving value here. I'm trying to do good work for you in your career. And, we've had people now who've come out of Entelo and they've gone on to Anthropic and OpenAI and Cursor and all these companies. And I think there was some sort of a mutual thing that was happening at the time of you're going to do good work for us and we're setting you up to do even bigger things in the future. And I think that's why it worked.
Yeah. So just to put a bow on that, I think the question that you ask also enables you to then cater your pitch to the candidate and make it more bespoke and personalized to them, which is where I see like, if people talk about AI slop, I've been thinking about this term called recruiting slop, where it's like you basically just say like, oh, well, this is our role. And this is like, I haven't thought about you at all. I've just thought about you in the abstract. And I just say, oh, you should come think about this thing for these reasons versus truly understanding like what a person's optimizing for in their life.
Yep.
Like not just in work, but like in their life. And that's
Yep.
where it starts to get really good.
Yeah, I love that.
You got to explain more about this. Like there's zero attrition in 8 years. And you guys were like going through the shit at the end. Like how did you keep people motivated? Like how did you do that?
Yeah. Well, admittedly, the last year was when I ran the business for 9, gave you 8, right? The last year we did have some folks that we lost that we would have preferred not to lose. So we went to amazing things. Look, I think there was a couple of things in this that I think were important. I think, number one was we had a very high bar for hiring. And we would always talk about this concept because I think it's important to give your team a rubric around hiring. One of the things we'd always talk about is hire above average. And we hired a team that was well above average, right? I listed off some of the places that folks are now. I mean, this is a well above average team. Above average did not mean above average in the general population. It meant if I was going to ask you to stack rank the team underneath you, let's say you got 9 engineers, 9 salespeople, whatever, stack rank them 1 to 9, right? Let's grab number 5 and this new person coming in that we're talking about for the role, are they above number 5? Right? You're never going to get a situation where you can only hire the person who's better than your best engineer. Like that bar's too high, right? But where a lot of people make the mistake is they hire the person who's maybe the 7th best out of 9, and now the team just goes down in quality. And I think part of the challenge, and there's obviously a massive amount of talk around talent density these days, which there should be. It's a great concept, but you have to be able to give people rules of thumb to go by, because like attracts like, and people want to be in an environment of high quality people. So when they start to see that bar going down, companies getting worse, right, by definition, now it's like, maybe I don't want to be here as long. But if the company is getting better over time, which I'd say for 8 years, I think that was true at Entelo, people want to be a part of it. What's next? Who are we going to attract to the table as our next hire? So I think that's really, really important. Is you can talk about talent density. It's a super important concept, but you have to give your team actionable things that can help them really identify what does it mean to have higher talent density? What does it mean to lift the bar? Because people are busy, and a lot of these people that we hire to run our teams, they haven't hired 500 people. So they need a better set of crib notes, if you will, to be able to go out and figure out who they need to hire and who they need to say no to, which is the most important part.
So in your example there, like, does that manifest tactically of like offers, say it's like offer approval time, recruiter sends Jon, the packet and the resume and all the things, the hiring managers are managers on the thread. And your response back is because you have access to the performance sheet. Your response back to the thread is Sally better than Johnny, who's engineer number 5 out of 10? Is that how that manifested?
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's a great way to talk about candidates, right? Because Johnny's on your team. You know what Johnny's like. You don't have as much data about Sally. That's the hard part, right? You've got 1% as much data about Sally as you do about Johnny. But if the hiring manager is saying, hey, Sally's better than Johnny, I'm going to put my career on the line. I'm going to tell you Sally's better than Johnny, make the hire, right? I mean, it's kind of that simple at the end of the day. And if you can't tell me that Sally's better than Johnny, if you don't have that level of conviction, Sally might be great. We should pass on Sally.
I actually love that way more than the Amazon hiring bar, because it's all like that thing is always like, oh, like we need to like raise the bar and you need to be better than, but it's like, it's so theoretical and it's not tactical. But I think people have been scared to make it like tactical and specific to a human because it feels personal. But to your point, the other side of it is like, no, it actually makes it more objective. Like it gives somebody like a framework to operate in and a field to play on. It's like, this is who we're trying to be better than. Are we? And are you willing to put your badge on the table that that's the case?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
I love that. Well, Jon, it's always, I always learn a ton chatting with you. Where can people find you and where can people find out more about this product that you guys are launching?
Yeah. So ZoomInfo.com, obviously our website. And we have right now a whole bunch of stuff that we're doing in the market. And I'm super excited because we're actually building a new product that we're going to bring to market next year. So when we are closer to that, I'd love to come back on the pod and share a little bit more about that. But I'm on LinkedIn. I don't post a ton. I might start doing a little bit more. I've definitely been pretty quiet over the last 6-7 years. In fact, this is the first podcast I think I've done since 2018. So I figured, why not break my silence on the world's best recruiting podcast?
He's back, baby. It's good to see you, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Love it. Thanks, Nolan.